Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, your source of strategies and insights to make you a better leader. Influence, improve, inspire.
Hi, it's Zoe. Welcome to the podcast or videocast, depending on how you listen to this. Dermot Crowley and I just had a good 5 minutes playing around with our setups to make sure that we're positioned correctly. And so hopefully if you're watching this video, it's going to work for you. And if you're listening in, you can just do the imagination piece. So Dermot Crowley, second guest star appearance on the podcast because he has a new book out. And I'm going to show the video of this, but it's going to be backwards because that's the way the camera works. Smart Teams. Teams that are smart. And his first book was Smart Work. So Dermot is a productivity expert. He helps teams and individuals work smarter and betterer together. So I'm really excited to have Dermot on the call to talk about this new work, because it's a shift from going from individual productivity to team productivity. And there's a huge amount of challenges when we get people together to work together. So welcome, Dermot.
Thank you, Zoe. Pleasure to be here. And could I first of all say that I named the book Smart Teams, but that doesn't mean that I go out and try and find stupid teams and train them to be smart. Those teams I work with are very smart anyway, but it's in line with my first book, Smart Work, so it's in that series.
Well, I think there's a good tagline there: how to make stupid teams smart. Might be a tough gig, though. All right, so I've got a barrel full of questions to get to with you on this one. And I've read through the book twice now, and in there you talk about going from friction to flow in teams. And I can think of a bunch of different friction. Mostly in the work that I do is around communication, personality clash, and silos. In your line of work with productivity, what kind of friction do you see happening? And do you have any examples to share?
Yeah. So the analogy I often use with friction and flow is, I've been teaching personal productivity for going on 20 years. And one of my frustrations is that I teach people how to be personally productive, and they get all excited and they see the potential of their system, but then they go back into a workplace that usually kills their productivity all over again, because in my experience, most cultures create productivity friction rather than promote productivity flow. And the analogy I use is a performance racing car. So if you had a Formula One racing car, there's two ways you can make that car go faster. You can either give it a bigger engine, which is a bit like the personal productivity stuff. So I give people bigger engines and I help them to get more done in less time. But the other thing that you can do with a performance race car is look at the aerodynamics of that car and try and reduce the friction and the drag that is created by airflow. And Formula One racing teams would spend millions on this every year. So for me, that's what Smart Teams is really about. Productivity is about doing both. It's about helping individuals to work more productively by giving them good systems and giving them the skills to do that. But it's also about the culture of the organization and how we can reduce that friction. So I guess that's the starting point. When it comes to productivity friction, I see it every day when I work with clients. There's three core areas that I focus on in the book from what I would call a cooperation point of view. When we work with others, we cause friction by using email and other communication tools ineffectively. We create friction by meeting, either too much or again, meeting ineffectively with other people. And we create friction when we collaborate as well with other people. So that's what I tend to focus on. And probably the worst experience of friction in a client organization was in a training session probably about 1.5 years ago. I flew to Melbourne to run a training session for a law firm, which is, quite often what I'll do. I work in a lot of law firms. I had a 1:00 session start time. So I turned up at about 12. I got myself set up. I had about 22 participants coming to the session. And out of 22 participants, 22 of them were late to the session.
What?
22. Every
100%.
was late. And that was, somewhere between a minute late to about 20 minutes late. And the thing that really shocked me was not a single person apologized to me for being late. They just walked in and sat down, and it was completely normal for them to be late. And during the break, I talked to one of the training people, and I said, that's pretty extreme. Every single person was late. And she said to me, look, that's the way it is around here. Everyone's always late for internal meetings. She said, we'd never do that with a client. We'd always turn up on time to a client, but nobody really cares about the internal meetings. And that spoke so much to me about the culture of that organization, that turning up late to meetings was completely acceptable, and no one thought to apologize because it was normalized for them.
Oh my God. There's lots I could say about having lawyers come together, having been, I am married to a lawyer and understand the culture, and I don't think any of them would tolerate that. So it's not just a lawyer thing, it's the culture of an organization, that's for sure.
Totally. And I work in enough law firms to know that's not the norm.
Yeah.
It was just the culture of this organization.
Yeah. And you've got a great quote in your book, which says, the group norm must not dictate our behaviors. Our behaviors must dictate the group norm. So tell me how that sort of fits into the example that you just gave. So clearly they've got this norm that it's okay to show up late. How do you switch it around? So explain this a little bit to me.
Yeah. Look, I think that, that we've heard the saying, the fish rots from the head down. I really believe that these group norms are often created by leadership, or at least tolerated by leadership. And if you allow a certain behavior to go on for long enough and enough people do it, it just becomes the way it is around here. And then lots of people come into an organization where the group norm is no one turns up to meetings on time, because we know that if we turn up on time, no one else is going to be there. So we take an extra 5 or 10 minutes to get our coffee or do whatever we're going to do, because we know it's not going to start on time anyway. And that begins to manifest as the group norm. And it's not just meetings, it's email. So, another example that I talk about in the book is an organization I worked with where the leadership team were getting about 500 emails a day, which is very, very extreme. But in the tech industry, that's kind of normal. And they were in the tech industry, obviously, and they kind of said, well, doesn't everyone get that many emails? And I'm kind of going, no, I'm training people to get 20 emails a day sometimes. Most of my clients would get 100 or maybe 150 emails a day. But for these guys, it had just become normalized that they got that many emails. And what starts to happen is we become victims to our inbox, we become victims of our schedule, and we don't think that there's anything that we can do to change that. And they're so wrong. There's so many things that we can do. So my quote, I suppose, is about the fact that we shouldn't be dictated
Whoa, hang on.
It is the way we behave. Am I losing you? You're losing me?
Yeah, our connection just went a bit funky. Just hang on a second.
No worries.
Okay, I think it's okay now. Yeah, sometimes up in the snow it goes a little bit in and out, but I've got you on full reception again now. So yeah, you were saying we allow ourselves to become victims to our schedules and to our work practices.
And I reckon that we need to take control, and if we do that, then our behaviours begin to dictate the group norm. So if we all make a concerted effort to turn up to meetings on time, the group norm will shift and we will start to have meetings that run on time, and that will be the expectation. And it really starts from leadership down. So leaders really need to be very aware of how their behaviours set cues and set the tone for everyone else in the organisation. So that's why when I work with organizations, I generally start with the leadership team, and help them to put good practices in place and then model those behaviours.
And you talk about a couple of good key behavior principles in the book, one of them being mindful and one of them being intentional. Did I get those two right? Or what are the key principles of attitude?
Yeah, close. I talk about 4 key qualities, a smart team player, if you like. And qualities, we could use another word, we could use values instead. I really just thought about, if you had this really highly operating team, what would the qualities of those team members be? And one of them is purposeful, so rather than intentional, purposeful. So people often say to me that I walk with purpose. So I think I got this from my father. My father never wandered anywhere. He always walked somewhere. He always knew he was going somewhere. And I'm exactly the same. I don't, dilly-dally around. I walk with purpose, but I also work with purpose. So I'm very, very careful about every time I send an email, I really think about, why am I sending this email? What's the outcome that I need to achieve? And how can I best write the email to achieve that? Who needs to receive it? They're all purposeful thoughts, if you like. And when I have a meeting, I'm making sure that I'm purposeful about how I spend that time, because I'm aware that it's not just my time, but it's the time of everyone involved in that meeting that's going to be wasted if I'm not purposeful about it. So that's the first quality I talk about. The second one is being mindful. And I think mindfulness has an internal focus, which is about managing your own attention. But it also has an external focus. So how can we always be mindful about how our behaviours impact other people in the workplace and try to make sure that we don't drag their productivity down?
All right. So we're talking about principles of mindful and purposeful. And I love that idea of walking on purpose. It reminds me of my days at Outward Bound. And when we had big programs on base, the staff were always instructed to walk with purpose, to give a sense of intentionality and not wasting any time and being effective that way.
Yeah, absolutely. The final quality is being punctual. And I think that is such a critical one when it comes to meetings. But it also has relevance for any type of work. So, let's deliver on time. Let's make sure we meet our deadlines, or again, negotiate if we're not going to meet our deadlines. So I reckon that if you could instill those qualities in everyone in the team, it would immediately have an impact on how we work together.
I reckon, and I think it's about becoming aware of those things too, because people end up in their own little silos. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is, you talk about reducing meetings by 100%. Now, you say in your book it's a little bit cheeky, and I thought when I first read that, I'm like, what does that mean? No more meetings? So you don't actually mean no more meetings. So tell us a little bit what you mean by that.
No, look, meetings are very necessary, but I reckon that we could achieve 100% reduction in meetings if we reduce the number of meetings that we held or attended by 25%. I reckon that we could easily reduce the number of participants in meetings by 25%. I reckon that we could have 25% shorter meetings. So the obligatory 1 hour time slot for a meeting, if it was 45 minutes, that's a 25% saving instantly. And finally, I reckon that we could reduce wasted time by 25% if we planned our meetings effectively. Now, if you add all that up, it makes 100% to me, but I'm Irish. But it is a little bit cheeky, and it's designed to jolt people a little bit and get them to kind of think about it. Okay, well, I can't completely get rid of meetings, nor would I want to, but I could make those incremental changes quite easily, and it would add up to a huge saving in time. And I think that meetings are a very expensive, luxurious way of working with other people, because it's not just one person in the room, it's potentially 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 people in the room. Collectively, it's not just the cost per head of those people, it's the opportunity cost. You've got to ask yourself, what are they not doing if they're in that meeting? And I reckon meetings are a participation sport, they're not a spectator sport. And yet so many of my clients talk about meetings that have 12 people in them, and yet 2 people are doing all the talking. Well, that says to me that you got 10 spectators, which could be a huge waste of time.
Well, yeah, it could be a facilitation problem in terms of who's chairing the meeting, where that not everybody's getting contributed, not being able to contribute, I mean. Or it could be, as you say, they just don't need to be there. So what is the alternative to meetings? So we're going to cut meetings out or cut the volume of them. Are there other ways to get the information shared or the work done when we need to work together? What do you suggest?
Yeah, look, I still think that meetings serve a purpose and are necessary in certain situations. So let's just do them quicker and have less people involved. So let's, have meetings with purpose and be really clear about what we need to achieve. And all of the research shows that you can achieve as much in a half-hour meeting as you can in an hour meeting if people are focused and there's an agenda and you all have that intent. But there are alternatives to meetings. And, sometimes people, I saw a great coffee mug in a workplace recently that said, just out of another meeting that could have been an email. I thought that was really cool. So how many meetings are called when really what was needed was an email sent to 3 or 4 people? We could communicate by email. We could use a collaboration tool like Microsoft Teams or Slack or, one of these tools that are very popular now, which become spaces for organizing information around the topic or a project or a client. And, sometimes that's all that's needed is communications posted to those places. And we don't necessarily need to have a meeting about it. I would also term a conversation as being an alternative, a very viable alternative to meetings. So a conversation is a less formal way of communicating with people. And, I guess you could argue that, well, if you have a conversation with someone, it's still a meeting, but it's much less formal and it's going to take less time than if you get half a dozen people together in a meeting room. So they're all options, I reckon.
What I found is with all the communication tools, as you mentioned, a couple of them, we use Slack, we use Wunderlist, we use Trello, all these collaborative tools. What we found recently and email is that we've had to put some parameters around which communication tool gets used for what, because then it became 5 channels that we had bits and pieces of information flow happening. And it was actually creating more work than saving it. So I think that's one of the things I've worked out with those kind of platforms is have some guidelines as to which communication tool works for which desired outcome. And I agree with you. Is that what you suggest too?
Totally. And you're probably in a less complex environment to many of our clients. But you're still facing that problem. Imagine what it's like for them. I have lots of client companies who kind of say, part of the problem with collaboration is we've just got too many tools and we don't know which tool we should be using when. And then we use the tools inappropriately. So, I don't hate email. I just hate the way email has been used in the wrong way for so long now. The guy who is credited with bringing email into the corporate workplace, Ray Tomlinson, he once talked about email, and he said, look, I never meant for it to become the beast that it's become. It was just meant to be a simple communication tool for a couple of people. And all of a sudden, it's how we file emails and store information. It's our to-do list. And it's a very poorly used communication tool. But there are alternatives. So we've got all these other tools that we could use to communicate. The challenge is that people are beginning to use those tools and they're using them just as badly as they were using them.
Yeah.
It just comes down to a simple conversation. Which tool should we be using for which purpose? Getting clarity around that. And I'm thinking about it. For instance, I'm collaborating with a client at the moment using one of these collaboration tools. And for the most part, it's really useful to all have this central space where we go and we post stuff. But that's really a pull tool. So it requires everyone to go in and catch up on the conversations that have happened in there. And sometimes what I need is a push strategy. So if there's an action for me, it can be frustrating if I go into the collaboration tool and I see that 2 days ago there was an action for me that I didn't see because it didn't come into my inbox. So sometimes email is the better tool in that situation. And we just need to have clear guidelines around that.
Yep, that's right. And I think it's about coming back to your first point about being purposeful is really important. So one of the things I told my team is like, please don't put any things that you need me to do or give feedback into Slack because I will lose it in there and it won't prompt me to take action on it. So I get them to actually put it in my Wunderlist, which is our communal task management system. So I know that, right, I have to execute on that. So that's a good example of taking friction out of the work environment. I want to talk a little bit about types of meetings, and you go into the book about presentation, delegation, creation, and deliberation. And in my book, Loyalty, I talk similarly about different types of meetings, where it's idea generating or it's idea decision making. There's one other type of meeting that you don't necessarily cover off, but you kind of allude to in one of your parts of it, and that's about meetings that are for the purpose of team bonding. What do you think about them?
Look, I reckon that is one of the things that makes meetings so necessary is the fact that we do need to come together with people and to work with them because we all get a sense of shared purpose from that, and we just feel good when we're around other people, and it's part of the human condition. But I guess when I talk about the different types of meeting, what I'm more referring to is the type of agenda item. So you can have a mixed meeting. So we could have a team meeting where we need to make a decision about something, but we also need to brainstorm some ideas about an upcoming project, and we need to just share some information. So for me, they're types of agenda item. And I think that the team bonding happens across all of those. So you don't want to have an agenda item in your meeting that we need to spend some time bonding. It should just naturally.
Come on. Don't you have to, but let's bond a bonding. Can you imagine how much fun that would be? A team bonding moment.
Sure. That's true. Yes, and it's meant to be spontaneous, but we can have it on the agenda anyway.
I would like some ideas about what that agenda item would actually look like in real time.
Yeah. Does that make sense? That we should have that threaded through all of our meetings, but the actual agenda items. All I want to do with that piece is to get people to think about, if they're creating an agenda, help the participants to understand what is expected of them with that agenda item. So if a decision needs to be made, I'll approach that differently than if I just think that some information is going to be shared about something.
Yeah, no, I think that's really useful because you kind of need to change gears. If you're going to have all those things in one meeting, the way that you think and participate changes. So if you're not going to dedicate an entire meeting to presentation, and you're going to have presentation, delegation, and creation all at once, you do have to change the gears of your high performance race car while you're in there, so you can deal with whatever you're doing at that point. And also the decision-making process or the contribution or the facilitation process needs to shift depending on what you're doing as well. So an astute chairperson will be aware of that and will communicate the expectations either ahead in the agenda or during the meeting. That's really smart, Dermot.
I hope so. And it kind of gets to one of the really key things that I talk about with meetings is the fact that I reckon that a lot of people put the cart before the horse, and they plan meetings the wrong way around.
Oh, tell me about that.
So I reckon that there's different aspects that you need to think about when it comes to a meeting. And what a lot of people do is they'll jump to the the obvious thing, what I call the coordination activities, which is really about who, where, and when. So we kind of think about, okay, who do I need to invite to this meeting? What meeting room am I going to book, or what meeting room is available? And when do we all have an available time where we could meet? That's often all people do when it comes to organising the meeting. They'll think about those coordination questions. But I reckon that the first step is really about context, and we need to set the purpose of the meeting before we do anything else. So that's about why. Why are we meeting? Why is a meeting needed here? And meeting organisers should always think first about what's the purpose that I want to achieve. And they should communicate this. So when I get people to create a meeting agenda and send the meeting invitation out to other people, what I try to get them to do is the very first line of that meeting agenda should be, the purpose of this meeting is to, and then you finish that sentence. That's a very clarifying statement, because it forces the meeting organizer to really think about what do we need to achieve in this meeting, and it helps the meeting participants to understand what it's really about. So that's step number one. And what happens is the purpose of the meeting then informs the agenda, which is step number two. We then need to list out what do we need to cover in this meeting, and what are the different types of agenda item, and how long do each of them need. So if why was all about context, then what is all about content. And once you've done that, that then informs the coordination. So that your agenda is going to inform who needs to be there, where the meeting needs to be, and when it needs to be, and how long we need for it. So I reckon that if we just jump straight to the coordination piece, we're actually really missing the point.
Yeah, we kind of just show up and go, right, what are we talking about today? And, we just wandered away through it. You're right. I just think about so many meetings I've attended where it's just waffle. That's pretty tough. So if an organization wanted to create a super productive culture, because that's in your book, you have these levels of productivity in organizations, and super productive is right at the very top. What does that actually look like?
So I reckon that it looks like an organization where productivity is seen as a leadership issue, and the leadership team have taken a responsibility for driving a productive culture in the organization. And that's number one. I think it's a culture where personal productivity skills are delivered to everyone in the organization, and it's a given that everyone's done some sort of workshop or has been given some skills to allow themselves to manage their own work and their own time and their own priorities. I think it's a culture where there have been some discussions and agreements made around how we're going to work together. So when we do meetings, what are the 5 behaviors that we all agree to? When we use tools like email, what are the 5 behaviors that we all agree to? And it's the same with collaboration. So that's going to be different for every organization, but part of what I do around the Smart Teams program is I facilitate this with internal champions and help them to come up with agreements that are appropriate to their organization, that are going to drive the behaviors that they want. And then finally, going back up to the leadership level, it's an organization where leadership doesn't just support a project like this to maybe increase the productivity within the organization. They actually model these behaviors themselves. So I had a very interesting experience working with an organization last year on Smart Teams, and what they decided was the very first area of productivity they were going to attack was their meeting culture. And the head of this organization had decided that he was going to declare a war on meetings. And he was really going to, it was almost Winston Churchill type speeches. He really wanted to try and decrease the amount of unnecessary meetings and the amount of people in those meetings. So one of the initiatives that they came up with internally was the idea of having Fridays as a meeting-free day.
Oh, cool.
And I thought that was great. Great leadership, giving people just some space where they could be really busy all week, but they knew on a Friday they could get some meaningful stuff done outside of meetings because they were allowed to have a meeting-free day. And we ran a whole lot of workshops around this, and they did a number of things internally to support this. But a couple of months into it, I was running some workshops, and feedback started flowing through to me that the meeting-free Friday wasn't quite working the way it was hoped.
Oh, really?
And one of the drivers for this was the CEO, who was frustrated that he needed to meet with people, but he couldn't meet with them on a Friday. So what he'd started to do was to bend the rules a bit. And he started sending out meeting invitations and saying, oh, by the way, this isn't a meeting, it's a discussion. So suddenly he had renamed meetings discussions with 10 people having the discussion. And people could see through this. And what it took for me, I luckily, just a few weeks later, I did a presentation at the leadership team offsite, and I called them out on this behaviour. And they looked in the mirror and they went, you know what, you're absolutely right. We're bending the rules, and we cannot expect other people to have good behaviours around meetings if we can't stick to it. So they got back on track. And they really started to live and breathe these behaviours themselves as a leadership group. And 6 months later, I asked them the question, how are you guys going with this? And the answer was very different. They were right on track, and they had really seen a big change in their meeting culture because of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well done, Hugh, and well done them, actually, for coming back and honoring what they'd agreed to. I call this a culture compass, which speaks more broadly to people's interactions with each other as opposed to specifically on productivity issues. But I think the hardest part about creating those agreements is actually following through and honoring them. So it's I think that's also a leadership challenge. It's like, we made these agreements, we need to call each other on it. So that was good that they managed to achieve that. So I'm curious then. So last part for today's interview, if people wanted to get started. So I'm thinking, I'm an executive in a large organization. I've done some productivity training myself. I know that there's friction in the way that I work with my colleagues. How do I go about starting to move towards a smart team culture?
So I reckon the first thing is to just sit down with your team and have a conversation and to understand where the pain points are. That can be a very interesting experience to have a talk about what's happening. And what you'll tend to find is if you're a busy executive and you're feeling some of these pain points or you're experiencing friction with your own productivity, I can guarantee everyone else in your team is experiencing exactly the same thing. And everyone would like a solution to the problem. So getting those pain points out in the open and understanding what needs to be addressed is the first thing. And then coming up with some simple agreements. And I call these agreements, we could call them protocols or guidelines or principles. But I like the term agreements because it suggests that we've come up with these protocols ourselves, and we're agreeing to work with each other differently. So this is not going to work if management comes up with a bunch of rules and then says to the rest of the organization, okay, this is how you need to behave in future. It needs to be a more facilitated process, and people need to have ownership. So that's why I call them agreements. But you can come up with those agreements yourselves. It's not that hard. My advice is usually to keep them to fewer rather than more. So I often talk about 5 things. So if you're going to change your email culture because you're getting snowed under by too much email noise, come up with 5 agreements around how you use email or communicate with each other, and stick to those 5 things. Don't make it 10. Don't make it too hard. Just keep it simple. and choose a manageable number of things to shift your behaviors on.
Fantastic. So if people want to buy Smart Teams, what's the website address for that?
So you can either go to our website, which is adaptproductivity.com.au, and you'll find links through to the appropriate pages where you can buy it. It's published by Wiley, so you can go to the Wiley website. But indeed, it's available on Amazon and in all good bookstores like Dymocks. So you can head to any of those websites and you'll probably find it.
Okay. And failing all that, you can go to the show notes at zoerouth.com/podcast/smart teams, and we'll have a link to the book sites there. Dermot, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. You do such thorough thinking on how people can work better together. And your book, Smart Work, which I send out to all of my mastermind participants, is by far and away the one that they quote back as the most useful and enjoyable book of all the ones that I send out. So my peeps, my mastermind members are definitely fans, and I'm excited to bring this work to them as well. So thanks, Dermot.
Oh, thank you. It's been such a pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity.